Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple, verse by verse, chapter by chapter, and book by book study of the entire Bible. We're starting a new book and we are starting a new section in the Old Testament. So we're starting the book of Job. I'll get to that more on that in a moment. Last time we finished Esther, and we said that the book of the Old Testament, in fact, the entire Bible, can be summed up or broken into different sections. And in each section, for example, the first section we just completed, which was from Genesis to Esther, was a historical narrative, the historical history from the beginning of creation to the post-exile Israel. In conclusion with Esther, shortly after we would go into the 500-year intertestament period. Okay, in your Bible, from Malachi to the book of Matthew, that was a 500-year period of time. Okay, but when you look at how the Bible is arranged, now keep this in mind. Each book of the Bible, you can even probably say certain groups were written at certain times. So, for example, very possible the part of the historical narrative, First and Second Samuel, First and Second Kings, First and Second Chronicles could have been written by the same person or at a different time. Okay, but that's not important as much as how they were arranged. Usually within each section, they were arranged according to the dating. Now, of course, we kind of somewhat dealt with some of the why the dating, as some people thought maybe Ezra wrote first, pretty much almost the Old Testament. Some people say. I don't believe that that's true. Because in each book you see that sometimes there's sections written where it talks about something appearing like a statue or something like that, and then it says to this day. Well, if that was true, you wouldn't write it prior to the Babylonian exile, because the Babylonian exile destroyed everything: Jerusalem, the wall, the temple, everything, and then deported the people out. All right, but the sections of the Bible, from those the first section again, which we just completed, from Genesis to Esther. Okay, the second section, which you're getting ready to begin, would be Job, and then all the way to the Songs of Solomon. Um, uh, and then those books. So when you talk about the Songs of Solomon, I'm sorry, Job, which in this case, Job is the oldest book, and I'll get more than that after this. But you have Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Songs of Solomon. I'm sorry, only 5 books, but some of these books, of course, are long, like Psalms. Remember, there's 150 Psalms, and then Job is a long book as well. And then those arranged, again, as I said, they are arranged pretty much in the fashion or with belief that they were written. As I said, Job being the oldest book again. Then after that, you have the writings of the prophet. And so they actually divided into 2 sections: the minor and major prophets. The major prophets are Isaiah, Jeremiah. Lamentations is thrown in there, even though it's believed to be written by Jeremiah. Ezekiel, and then Daniel. And again, these are pretty much believed to be written in the order in which they were written. Except for Daniel and Ezekiel, they're written about the same time. They were contemporaries. The minor prophets are Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. Now, the way when we get to this section here, the problem with well, again, they're written in kind of order that they believe to have been written. The idea of dividing them up into major and minor prophets, again, so this is the work done by the scholars, not God in that respect. So the most important thing is the revelation, the prophecy that was given. When we get to this section, however, we are going to do something different. So from Hosea to Zephaniah were written in a time around the same time frame as Isaiah. So we will study Isaiah and then the minor prophets there, because the same prophetic voice as God begins to warn the people of Israel to repent. Now, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi were post-Babylonian exile or deportation books. Those three books, okay, would have fit more with Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. That time frame, in other words, the time frame. So that's why we will study Isaiah, and then we will study all of the other books. A lot of them not that long. And then when we get to Zephaniah, we'll go back to Jeremiah. And that's more of the timeline. Some of you might have a chronological Bible. I haven't read one. I knew a person had one. I don't know if they arrange it this way. Chronological Bibles, if they do that, I don't know how they would do that in terms of, I mean, the first section, when we talk about the book of, I mean, the first historical section, I don't know how they would do that. I just don't know how. But anyway, that's how in terms of the Old Testament, that's how we're going to, in a sense, study the Old Testament. Okay. I'm getting too far in the reads here. And then, of course, there's the New Testament, in which you have the Gospels, the four Gospels, including Acts, and then the letters of Paul, and then the other letters, a few letters of the apostles and writers there. So we're in Job, and so this section is called the Book of Wisdom and Poetry, things like that. I don't know about poetry as much as you can say wisdom. And then, of course, there's the Book of Psalms itself, which is 150 Psalms. Really, it's not when we get to of course, it's called the Book of Psalms. Much like the Bible, the Psalms is a collection of songs. And so we'll get into that more, because some from Moses, some from, mostly I'm going to say from David. So, and then there's prophetic words in there. All right, so Job, the book of Job. So this is, of course, will be just an introduction to the book of Job, and then we'll kind of get more into it in the next study. But so Job is known as probably the oldest book. So even though Moses writes in his book Genesis, okay, he starts with creation. Well, remember, he's writing this, and Moses is the one who's writing this. So the timeline in terms of when the book was written is much, much further along, okay, centuries, than the timeline of Moses. So if you want to put the timeline of Job, you would have to put Job around the time of Abraham, okay? Possibly even before the time of Abraham. And of course, there was no Jewish nation at that time. Which makes Job's kind of interesting because you start with and you go back to the Genesis account, so you start with the creation. You start with Adam being created. And then you see God's command to Adam not to eat of the tree. He says, because in the day that you eat of the tree, you will die. Well, we know Adam did eat of the tree, and he lived some 900 years. I want to say 927 years. Let me go back and see here. Let's see. 930. Adam's life was 930 years. Now, some people have a real hard time understanding that. But as sin progressed and the effects of sin, lifespans got shorter. Which kind of is interesting. I know I'm kind of going off a little bit, but man, think about living 900 years back then, which would have been probably a lot different in terms of how we would have processed that. You know, in other words, like now, I'm in my 60s. And so I feel it, okay? I feel my body aging. But that would have been some, like a 60 probably, like say here during this time would have been around what? I don't know, 800 years maybe. And you start feeling, oh, I'm getting old. My bones are getting to crack, but that's 800 years. And of course, the whole mindset would have been different. But anyway, I certainly got off there. So this period, this first kind of generation, this first span of generation, which is approximately, you can almost say 2,000 years. Job probably would have been around the time after, let's say this first generation, the first 11 chapters of Genesis. Job probably would have come in after that, as you get, as I said, around the time, of Abraham, and then possibly before. Now, what is amazing about this time, however, is that Job is very God conscious. And that's what's amazing about this, that Job is very God conscious. Now, one of the things to understand about when we read the Bible, that we're focused, that the narrative is focused. Like when you read through, as we read through, and I said this throughout, the focus on Israel was one thing, but we oftentimes would forget that there was a world out there, okay, and a pagan world, a world that did not know God, a world that did not follow God. What is interesting about the time of Job is that sinful man lived. They were aware of God. And we see some things here. We're going to see some things about Job that is very interesting. In other words, he's very much aware of God. So in this sinful world around him, he's very aware of God, who God is, the true God. In other words, he's not worshiping a pagan God. He's worshiping the true and living God. Now, as we get into Job, Um, the first two chapters of Job is the setup, and boy, it is a setup, right? So then from chapters 3 all the way to about 36, um, 37, like that, it becomes a human story. Now this is what I mean. Um, Job, as we will see, is a righteous man. God himself will say he's a righteous man. God will allow Satan to completely destroy his life. And Job, understandably, won't understand that. And then we're going to see from chapters again 3 to, like I say, 37 is a discourse between Job and three of his friends. That's the bulk of the book. And then we're going to see, as you get into chapters 38, God is going to address Job and going to answer some questions that Job has. So while it's a long book, as these customers would go, it is a fascinating book because, in essence, they somewhat answers some of the questions like we may have, like, why does God allow suffering? Now, you're not going to answer that question directly. More so, the question arises for us as we read, well, why did God give permission for Satan to destroy a righteous man? That would probably be the most baffling question that we would have to answer. There is a reason. We'll get into it. I'll say this, even though Job asked the question himself, God doesn't answer him. And that's why this book becomes very fascinating, because what we see from the beginning to the end is that God is God. God is sovereign. He doesn't answer to man. He doesn't feel that he owes man. Another thing is this idea when we're here on earth, that how arrogant we can be. Well, God needs to answer my questions. And I'm going to throw in this, I'm angry at God. I'm this and that and other of God. Are you? And that's fine until God shows up. And that's what we're going to see right here. Job got that way. Job got to the place where he was like, okay, I'm not understanding God. Boy, if God was here, I would ask him this, that, and the other. And God shows up and says, okay, let's talk. And then Job has nothing to say. He's like, So a lot of this study will be kind of reading back and forth between the Job's friends. So buckle up for that. Okay, buckle up for that. Again, this will be a fascinating story, as I said, because it is going to somewhat answer some questions. And the reason why I'm putting it that way is because I didn't say you would get a satisfactory answer, a satisfying answer. But you're going to get God's response in your respects. All right, guys, look, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. See you in the next study.